Just to be clear, I am a fan of Zack Snyder, okay? I like Zack Snyder's films. I really love 300, I love Watchmen, I really love Man of Steel. Batman vs Superman is good, I do quite like it. It has its problems for sure, but overall I like Batman vs Superman, specifically the Ultimate Edition. And I do really like the Snyder Cut a lot. I do just think that film needs to be trimmed down into a much more manageable length. I have not seen Dawn of the Dead or Sucker Punch, but in regards to his film Army of the Dead, didn't really like it all that much. I think the first bit of it is quite good, specifically the opening, and I also quite like the stuff up until they go into the city. But after an hour in, I'm like, Zach, this is too long. You gotta speed this up now. Get to the point. You end it now. It does not have to be 2.5 hours long, but for some reason, Army of the Dead is 2.5 hours long. But anyways, the point is that I like Zack Snyder. I'm a fan of Zack Snyder. I think Zack Snyder is a really cool guy. Seeing him in interviews, he's just a guy. He's cool. He seems really nice. He seems really fun. Everyone that works with Zack always says something very positive to say about him. I'd love to work with Zack one day. I think Zack Snyder's really cool. But getting into Rebel Moon, the thing is with Rebel Moon is that I really wanted to love this. I really did. This was him coming off the Snyder Cut, coming off Army of the Dead. This was Zack Snyder outside of the mainstream studio system. He was working with Netflix. It seemed like Netflix was giving him the creative control to do whatever he wanted. Snyder in interviews has talked a lot about how Rebel Moon was initially a concept for a Star Wars film that he pitched to Disney, but they rejected it. And so he took it to Netflix and decided to finally create this big epic space opera. And you watch it and you kind of go, there's nothing really new or creative about this. There's nothing really original about this. I can kind of see why studios rejected this in the first place. In interviews, Snyder always talks about how Rebel Moon was inspired by Kurosawa samurai films. I've yet to see a lot of them, but through osmosis of watching other things like Star Wars and such, you kind of get the general picture and outline of what these films are supposed to be. I do plan on watching Kurosawa stuff, but anyways, the point is that Snyder really talks about how a lot of Kurosawa stuff influenced the film, but when you watch the film, you kind of go, oh, I've seen this 1,000 times, but also, you kind of go, I'm assuming this is just how it's done in the Kurosawa stuff. And because certain popular IP like Star Wars has been influenced by Kurosawa stuff, and other things after Star Wars has been influenced by Star Wars, you can't help but feel like a lot of the stuff Star Wars pulled from, other things have pulled from, and so in many ways, when Rebel Moon pulls from it, it just feels really played out and generic. Also, visually, we'll talk about the cinematography in a second, but from a visual standpoint, in terms of the aesthetic of the world, it feels very generic. It feels very played out. I've seen things like The Creator. This stuff looks like The Creator. I've seen Dune. This looks like Dune. I've seen Star Wars. This looks like Star Wars. I can kind of see bits of Man of Steel that Zack Snyder was talking about. He said a lot of Man of Steel's design work influenced Rebel Moon. I can see some of it, but for the most part, this film just looks like Dune. It looks like Star Wars. It looks like Warhammer. Now, I am not a massive Warhammer fan. In fact, my friend Nick is a massive fan of Warhammer, and he's shown me some of the concept trailers and teaser stuff for Warhammer, and the Warhammer universe looks really cool. I'm excited with the fact that Henry Cavill's creating his own Warhammer stuff. The thing I will say about Warhammer, though, is that a lot of it feels very influenced by Dune. Anyways, the point is that even though I'm not super invested in the Warhammer stuff yet, because I have a feeling that when the Henry Cavill show comes out, I'll, fall in love with it and really get into it, I couldn't help but feel like Rebel Moon was just ripping off things from Warhammer, from Dune, from Star Wars. Like, the aesthetic of the evil fascistic empire, that is literally just Dune. Yeah, you could say, actually, it's Star Wars, but when you look at it, yes, Star Wars stole that, but Star Wars stole that from Dune, because in Dune, the whole Atreides and Harkonnen paraphernalia is supposed to be militaristic, it's supposed to be fascistic, and all of that stems from things like Stalinism and Nazism, and so yes, when the bad guys in Rebel Moon show up, they're pretty much just dressed like Nazis, and that's not really a unique concept. God, I'm still talking about aesthetics. I haven't even got into the story yet, but hold on, we're almost there. Cinematography-wise, Zack Snyder needs to stop shooting his own films. I'm sorry, no matter how much Zack Snyder loves to be behind the camera, he needs to stop shooting his own films. They don't look good. Army of the Dead is borderline unwatchable because of how shallow the depth of field is, and Rebel Moon has the same problem. I don't know what Snyder's obsession is with this dream lens he keeps using. The lens that has a super shallow depth of field and goes down to half a stop of light or something. I don't know what his obsession is with that lens, but he needs to stop using it. It doesn't look good. Also, the color grading is super dull and muddy, and it's not interesting to look at. And the opening shot of this film, it starts off with the Rebel Moon Part 1, a Child of Fire thing or whatever, and the camera pans down to the not Tatooine farmland planet, and that shot looks awful. They didn't use the volume, but it looks like they used the volume, and poorly. It just looks really bad. Zach, I say this out of love, but for your next project, hire Larry Fong, hire another DP, hire the DP that shot Man of Steel. Just don't shoot your own films. Please. Okay, I think that's most of my visual aesthetic gripes out of the way. Going into the story for Rebel Moon. The story from Rebel Moon, from what I can remember, because I'm not gonna lie, this film is incredibly forgettable, is that the Imperial evil force go down to this planet where one of their ex-soldiers is hiding in. And they go to the planet and they're like, we want all your grain. And they're just like, oh, we don't have much grain. And the Empire's like, doesn't matter, we want your grain. We'll be back in 10 weeks so you can give us enough grain and then we'll come back and we'll leave you alone or whatever. And so Sophia Batella's character, who is the ex-Imperial, is like, we need to fight them. We're gonna go on this fetch quest to get a bunch of people, and we're gonna fight the Imperials because we want to protect this planet. And it's like, okay. And from then on, the film is just essentially a series of fetch quests to get people so that they can come back to the planet and defend the planet. But we don't see that because that's saved for part 2. Why? No clue. This film is filled with so many generic cliches and so many scenes and sequences that don't make any sense. Of course, there's a scene where the Imperial soldiers try to rape the beautiful farm girl just because that's a thing. You see that scene play out and I'm like, I've seen this in The Witcher, I've seen this in other fantasy stuff. This is so played out. And it doesn't feel organic in the writing. It genuinely just feels like it's a thing that we have to do because that's a trope. That's a standard fantasy sci-fi trope of, oh yeah, the pretty farm girl is gonna get raped by the Imperial soldiers. Do it in a more creative way, Zack. And the film just being a series of fetch quests to get characters is so stupid because despite the fact that a lot of the scenarios to get the characters to join them is fairly simple or fairly stupid or don't make any sense, like for example the guy that flies the Griffin, him joining them makes no sense because all he wants to fight the Empire. The guy that has him imprisoned is just like, if he can tame this Griffin then I'll set him free and he can come and fight with you. Why? What is the, What? If you have this guy captured as a slave, why is him taming a griffin a source of payment? And also, if the deal was the guy just had to tame the griffin, then why didn't he do that before? Why did Sophia Batella's gang have to show up for the guy to be like, yeah, if he captures the griffin and tames it, then he can be free? Why didn't the guy make that deal beforehand? I will say, the sequence where the lady has to kill the Jenna Malone spider because Jenna Malone's spider creature thing has stolen one of the children because if she can't have children, no one can have children. That thing was kind of cool as a concept, taken out of context of the rest of the film, but as an overall piece of the narrative, it doesn't fit at all. It's just a thing that happens because yeah, we need a lady with 2 lightsaber looking things to fight this giant spider creature and that's it. Action scene, but doesn't fit into the narrative. There's no real reason for this. There are 2 things when watching Rebel Moon that really annoyed me. One, we keep collecting all these characters, but these characters don't interact. They just go from place to place picking up these characters and they don't interact. There's no conflict within the characters. They just go collect these characters, say 1 or 2 lines of dialogue, and then they disappear throughout the rest of the film. And the second thing that just annoyed me was how the film just stopped. Like, plainly, it just stopped and played a trailer for part 2 and was like, oh, hey, you want to see the rest of the story? It's gonna happen in part 2. Like, what a waste of time. Why did I watch this 2-hour and 50-minute film if the film doesn't even properly conclude and it's just set up for another film that, when you look at the trailer for it, is just the 3rd act of this film? Honestly, I am getting quite sick and tired now of every Hollywood property just doing a part 1 or a part 2 for the sake of it. Films like Across the Spider-Verse can get away with it because overall, they're good. But Rebel Moon absolutely does not get away with it at all. Because 1, Rebel Moon is incredibly boring. 2, it's incredibly generic. And 3, how is there an extended cut for this? I actually am really baffled. Zack Snyder swears up and down that the director's cut for Rebel Moon is a completely different film. And I can probably believe it to a point. But then also, if that was the film that Zack swears is like the definitive version, why did he not release it? Why did Netflix not just release that? In the past, Zack Snyder's director's cuts were simply a tool for him to show the rest of the film his complete artistic vision, like with Batman vs Superman or with Watchmen. The studios at the time he was working for believed that those versions of those films were too long for theatrical distribution, and so they released those on disc and on digital later. But this is streaming we're talking about. This is Netflix. You can just dump a film of any length, and that's the film. There is no time constraint. Why did Netflix want 2 versions? Were they trying to create the Snyder Cut hype? Because that doesn't make any sense either, because the Snyder Cut was born out of tragedy of Zack Snyder being pushed out of the Justice League production because of the death of his daughter, and Warner Brothers taking advantage of that and butchering his vision. There is no story or phenomenon of Netflix making a Rebel Moon director's cut. In many ways, it's just a piss take and a waste of time. Also, somebody needs to cut off Zack Snyder's hand or remove the slow motion function from all the cameras he uses on his films, because the amount of slow-mo in Rebel Moon is so pointless. The whole point of slow motion is to really hyper-focus on a moment, to really exaggerate a moment. That can be a character's reaction to something, a cool moment in an action scene, and Zack Snyder, once upon a time, used to be the guy that was the king of slow motion. He knew when to use it properly. There's this fight scene where you can tell, one, it was supposed to be way more violent and way more bloody. It's the scene in the barn where Sofia Boutella is going around killing everyone. You can tell when she goes to slice people in the neck that there's supposed to be blood and that there is supposed to be limbs and torsos and guts flying everywhere. But two, the slow-mo just looks so dumb and stupid. Sofia Boutella is just sliding on the ground, punching people, and it's just done in super slow motion for no reason. Same thing with the cantina fight. It's just a shootout in a cantina, but it's just done in slow motion for no reason. Also, the dialogue in this film is atrocious at times. It seems like Zack Snyder and his co-writer just pulled out a thesaurus and just started using all the longest and most complicated words they could find and just sticking them in sentences for no reason. Like, the opening narration to this film is so wordy and so complicated for no reason. It's like Anthony Hopkins being like, before time began, the Earth and the Imperium mothership of the Motherworld and the hierarchy of the planetary intersectory alignment. It's like, what are you saying? What is actually going on? The conquest of the Imperium Galactica. It's like, what is this dialogue? A lot of the dialogue is so bad that a lot of the cast in this film struggles to get their mouth around the dialogue. And it's really silly too, because a lot of this cast is really good and really talented. Also, Rebel Moon was supposed to be Sofia Boutella's main starring vehicle. This was supposed to be her in the main lead role. But you watch it and you go, she's a good actor. I've seen her in other things like in Kingsman and Tom Cruise as the Mummy and such, and she's good. She's a competent actor. But in Rebel Moon, where she's meant to be the lead, you can tell that she's not a great actor, because a great actor would be able to elevate the dialogue. I mean, granted, the dialogue she's given doesn't help, but a great actor would be able to elevate the dialogue. And Sofia Boutella is fine. She's a competent performer, but it's just, she doesn't really shine in this. Granted, a lot of that has to do with the writing, because the character she plays, Kora, great name there, Zack. So unique. I've never heard the main female character of a sci-fi fantasy series being called Kora. Genius. But Kora as a character is just incredibly forgettable. She's what, a child that was raised by the Empire. She lost her lover and such and was exiled to the farm, or she exiled herself to the farm or whatever. And then her tragic past has come back to haunt her and such. Like, you've seen this before. But you can tell though in the scenes that when Sofia Boutella has to deliver expositional monologue, and granted that expositional monologue is not very performable, it's very wordy and you're kind of like, what the hell is this? You can tell though that she does really kind of struggle to wrap around what she's really saying. Like in the scene where she sits down with Dario Naharis, the second Dario Naharis, I do think it's kind of funny how both Dario Naharises from Game of Thrones are in Rebel Moon, which is kind of fun, I guess. Anyway, she sits down with Dario and explains her backstory, and you can just tell that she's trying, but there's really not much for her to actually really do performance-wise, because a lot of the dialogue is so expositional and so wordy where you're just like, you can't really give her anything to latch onto to really just get into the character. I was a child of war and fire and blah 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 and the Imperium blah blah blah, and it's like, who cares? This is just waffle. And because it's just waffle, it's giving Sofia as a performer not much to really go on with. You know, that's kind of everything I've really got to say about Rebel Moon. There's not really too much I can say about Rebel Moon. It's just, it was a letdown, I'm not gonna lie. I was really looking forward to this. I really wanted Zack Snyder to prove his haters wrong, that he was a visionary, that he was the guy to come up with bold and original ideas. But at the end of the day, when I watched Rebel Moon, I couldn't help but realize that a lot of Zack Snyder's critiques are quite valid. When he's given a good script, he can make a really great film like Watchmen or Man of Steel. I like Man of Steel a lot, okay? If you don't like Man of Steel, that's fine. And overall, he does have a plan and an outline and a vision for the stories he wants to tell. But then you realize that when left to his own devices, Zack Snyder is not a very economical director. He really likes to pad out scenes and pad out the runtime for no real reason. You give him a guide, like a graphic novel, like 300, he'll make a fantastic film. All he has to do is just translate the images and put them on screen and make them move. That's what he really excels at. But when he's left to his own devices as a storyteller, as a creator, there's not really much there. And it does really disappoint me to say that, because I really wanted Rebel Moon to be great. I really wanted Zack Snyder to prove the world wrong and to prove me right, that I was, you know, justified in really wanting to support Rebel Moon, into really supporting his vision, into really, I was rooting for him, I really was, and just, Rebel Moon let me down. It really did. Rebel Moon is awful. That genuinely sucks. I wanted this to be good. I really... God damn it, Zach. Those are my thoughts on Rebel Moon. What did you guys think? Did you guys like it? Did you hate it? Are you going to watch the 3-hour, 4-hour long director's cut? Are you going to watch part 2? Funnily enough, Rebel Moon part 2 comes out on my birthday, which is, I don't know how to feel about that anymore. Originally, I was excited. Now, after seeing the first one, I'm not anymore, so it is what it is. God damn it, Zach. But those are just my thoughts on Rebel Moon. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, follow me on social media, all the good stuff. It's all down in the description. Until we meet again, see you guys next time.